Welcome to another edition of 1 in 15. As ever, I'm going to get my guests to introduce themselves.
Hello, my name's Alastair Jones. I used to live in Brighton, but I now live in Manchester and have done for the last 19 years or so. I've done a variety of different things, but I started life as a scientist. I used to fire lasers into very high vacuums and watch very little things fall apart. And then after that, I got involved in youth work, did a lot of youth work, working with young people and helping them develop their leadership. And after a variety of different jobs, working for the Salvation Army for a long time, I became the chief exec of an organisation called Frontier Youth Trust, which is a youth work, national youth work charity. I ran that for about 5.5 years. And then for the last 3 years, I've been running my own business, which is called Cadence Leadership, which comes from one of my other passions, which is cycling. And cadence is the tempo that you cycle at, which can sometimes be really fast, other times really slow. So yeah, so now I do leadership development and coaching. I work with a variety of leaders in business, in the voluntary sector, and right the way across that kind of spectrum.
Brilliant. That sounds amazing, and I'm sure that you've left out other things that you've been involved in over the years as well. As you know, the purpose of these interviews is to kind of wrestle with one big thing that's been dominating people's thinking. What would that be for you?
I think for me, the key thing has been around something that is known as imposter syndrome. Obviously, thinking about the fact that during lockdown, lots of people were put on furlough, lots of people were moved from the buildings that they work in and the things that they did and had to relocate in a time of quite a lot of churn. Maybe just really think about just how is it that we function and who is it that we are. So it's called into question lots of people's identity and actually the way that they think. And I think for me also, imposter syndrome was kind of the founding story as to why I'm doing what I do now.
Yeah.
So a couple of years into when I was chief exec, I remember I was out on the bike. I mentioned earlier about my passion of bikes with 3 other chief execs. One guy who is sort of local to Manchester, and then 2 other national charities. And we were out cycling, and I think we kind of looked at each other at some point during the day and said, "Do you think one day anyone will actually ever realise that we shouldn't really be doing this, and that we've never had any training to be a chief exec, and like one day sort of we're all going to get found out, really." So I suppose from that point onwards, I began to. Well, I was already kind of reading about leadership, and I'd done a leadership training program that Tony Blair had paid for, and all those sorts of things. So I've had all sorts of leadership training. But I think from that point, I well, how can I help chief execs? How can I help leaders, people in any form of leadership to really consider who they are and also to find their value, to find their worth, but also to address that issue of imposter syndrome.
Okay, so I'm fascinated by imposter syndrome. So I could make all kinds of jokes about my own. But it kind of feels on one level that it's a relatively new thing, that people are more aware of it. It might just be that my own journey kind of become much more aware of it recently. I'm really conscious of my own imposter syndrome. I'm really conscious of in conversations, it's one of those things that, like you talk about your bike ride, when you admit to somebody else that you have those worries, that you're waiting to be found out, as you put it, more often than not, they can at least empathize to some extent. And it probably exists across all kind of spectrums, I guess, of levels of employment stuff. Obviously, people, the higher up you are in an organization, the more of an impact it might have on how you do things, or the greater your fear of being found out might be. What are some of the ways that you kind of help people wrestle with it, recognize it, and deal with it?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things is, first of all, that self-awareness piece. So it's recognizing that, okay, so I think I might be doubting myself at times, because that's often a really good place to start, in the same way that, it's not until an alcoholic realizes that they might be drinking too much that they begin to then do something about it. So I think the first thing is kind of recognizing, oh, did I actually really doubt myself then? And then kind of moving on from that, I think a lot of the issue is for people is, okay, well, what evidence is there? So is there evidence that actually I'm incompetent at this? Because obviously the old joke is, we get promoted to the level of our own incompetence. And then from there, you can kind of go on. And we've seen a lot in the media about conscious incompetence and unconscious incompetence. And there's been quite a dialogue around, are our politicians, deliberately making a mess of this, or are they, or is this actually the real them? But without going into too much politics. So I think that conscious or unconscious competence or incompetence, that for me, that kind of grid and how that fits together with that, with our imposter syndrome, I think actually getting together evidence and actually talking to people around us, having a connected network is absolutely vital.
Yeah,
And the more people that there are in our network, the more people that support us, the easier it is to begin to address imposter syndrome,
sure.
because it's not just one person's opinion, it's not just my opinion thinking, oh, I was rubbish at that. Um, it's about actually, well, what are other people saying? How do they support? And having the right voices in that, and getting that
Yeah,
right type of feedback, I think.
yeah. And I'm really intrigued. I'm really intrigued by that notion of evidence, because what, you know, partly because of my own kind of issues in this area, I guess. I'm really conscious of how easy it might be for me to, or anyone suffering, to kind of manufacture false evidence that they are
Hmm.
incompetent, or maybe to be in a community where they collude. You know, if you're on a level of a company and everyone is, you know, has been, you know, promoted to that level of incompetence, everyone kind of colludes and supports each other. What are the ways of gathering evidence that we can't argue with, even though we might instinctively want to dismiss it?
Yeah, that's I mean, that's really fascinating, because there's one thing to say, well, I think I'm okay,
Yeah,
but because actually I'm obviously doing the job, aren't I? But for me, one of the key things is around finding different areas in which you thrive. What is it that you know is your strength, and when you operate in that area of strength, how do you feel about that?
sure.
Um, what's the sort of feedback that you're getting from people when you're having that? And then there are times when, yes, things don't go well. There are times when things don't go right, and how did then people give you feedback? And the key thing for me is around how we receive feedback and how we
Hmm.
give feedback, and the trusted relationships that we have within those. So I would say, for me, with throughout my working life, throughout my actual life, if I haven't had people around me who know me, who are honest with me, then I know I've always struggled.
Sure.
But in the main, I've made it my priority to put people around me who I really trust, and people who can speak into me, not just people who kind of will just cheer me up and say, oh, no, that was absolutely fine.
Yeah,
So I think that is one of the key things, actually, is about having enough level of trust and faith in someone that they're not going to destroy you. I remember
yeah,
once I was doing some public speaking, and I handed out some feedback forms to people in the audience, just like fairly randomly, and I thought, I'll give it to that person. I mean, they're in charge of that, that area, and they destroyed me, and it absolutely just like took the feet from under me. And all the other bits of feedback were, oh no, that was really
mm,
like either entertaining or informative or interesting or whatever. And this one was just like an outlier. And I must admit, of course, you ignore all of the really good stuff, and
yeah,
then you just focus on this outlier. And I remember thinking at the time, okay, why was that? And then you begin to dig a little bit deeper. And then as I got to know that person a bit better in the future, I found that this was a fairly consistent trait of that person, and
sure,
actually it
sure.
became less about me and more about their agenda. So I think how we find the right people to speak into our lives is really key,
Yeah,
and actually we do that with caution. We don't just do that unreservedly. There's a level of building trust, and again, I think that's how we know what evidence to accept and what evidence to
yeah,
reject, because that's really important. That there's feedback that we receive, but also feedback that we need to choose not to receive,
yeah,
whether that be our own inner voice saying that was rubbish, but likewise the kind of, as you say, that kind of colluding, where there's a sort of a level of incompetence that everyone perpetuates, and
yeah,
before you know it, you're in this sort of like downward spiral. Generally those organizations don't tend to last very long. I think
yeah,
that's one
for sure,
thing.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, really helpful. Again, as you're saying, you know, obviously we're both coaches, and we have these kind of conversations both with ourselves and with our clients all the time.
Yeah.
I'm really conscious of that. Actually, that's one of the values of someone like a coach, isn't it? Is of sitting down and helping you sift through that evidence,
Mm.
and helping you have the courage to go, actually, that is worth taking on board, and that one is worth ignoring because you know this thing about that person, or you know it's possible. And of course, the other thing for me, I remember having a client who was struggling with this a little bit, and we worked out that there were 4 or 5 people completely independent of each other who were telling this person the same positive bit about themselves.
Yeah.
And it was one of those glorious coaching moments where you just go, can you notice that? You know, and they, because they couldn't argue against it, because these people hadn't
Mm.
colluded. There was no way they colluded with either her or with each other. And so she had to kind of come away with a, you know, she still wrestled with it. She still wrestled with
Hmm.
that being true about her, but she had to agree that it must be, or at least it was, you know, bona fide how people saw her, of course, then you can compound it. Okay, that's really, really interesting. You talked about it in the context of the pandemic as well. In your opinion, has it expanded? Is it having more of an impact, or people wrestling with it in different ways?
Well, I think one of the effects of the pandemic is because we're dislocated from the communities that we're used to operating within, whether that be through a social community, like just being able to meet. Like, I live in Manchester, we've not been allowed to meet anyone even in our back garden since the middle of August. Not even allowed to go down to London to visit my parent, my mother, and all of those sorts of things. So when we're disconnected from that, there's a churn which is created, and obviously we're not even in the office, so people working from home, all of those bits of body language. I don't know if you've noticed, everyone does a little wave at the end of a Zoom meeting, because we're all kind of craving that human connection, and we're not getting that at the moment. So I think that has perpetuated that disconnect, and as a result of that, I think people's identity as a result is, we can't help but ask questions of that and sort of say, oh, am I still on the right course? Who am I? What's going on? And then everything goes from macro, we have this big world, into the micro, and we focus in on the tiny details, because that's all that's around us. We're in one house with one set of family. Even if you've got a massive family like 4 children, or if you've just got 2 like I've got, and I've just managed to get one back to university yesterday, then we've got all of these different factors, and I think we kind of focus on the tiny detail, the microscopic detail, in such analytical depth, that again we begin to lose the bigger picture, and as a result of that, there's a sense of dislocation as well that happens. So I think there's a number of different factors that are all kind of feeding into each other there. But yeah, lots of plates, and they're all spinning, and they're all spinning in different directions, I suppose. But as a result of what's going on because of COVID.
Yeah, like I see. Yeah, I agree with that completely. And there's this kind of level as well, isn't there? That in pandemic, those of us who've been fortunate enough to still have employment, it'd be really, really easy to get caught up in how we're doing things rather than the what of what we're trying to do. And I remember that I was a director for Worth Unlimited for a year, and that was always the question we had to kind of do. Whenever there was change, it was like, well, we could carry on trying to do it the same way that we used to, but the resources might not be there, or the context might have changed dramatically. So we always had to kind of come back and ask ourselves that question: what is it that we want to do? And maybe the methodology has to change because of the circumstances. I guess that might feed into people's imposter syndrome as well, because they're sat at home and they're thinking, at work, in the office, in their interactions with other people, they know what it is, they know what their purpose is. Whereas at home, the Zoom meeting disconnects or the Wi-Fi goes down, and just like suddenly you feel you don't know anything. People at CEO level who can't remember how to, change the ink on a printer. Suddenly that's a big thing, isn't it? It's really interesting, and also I'm sure there's lots of other things like paying into it as well. We're coming towards the end of the interview. What advice would you give to people who've been wrestling with, who listen to this and they go, yeah, I can see that's part of my story, whether recently because the pandemic's impacted it in particular, or actually it's been an ongoing thing for outside of that context. What are some of the places you can start? You've mentioned some of those, I think, but kind of reiterate or give us some insight.
I think one exercise that can be quite helpful when we're talking about evidence is it's actually writing down what you know to be true. Writing down what's been affirmed by other people, making sure that you've got a group of people that you trust within that, and if you don't have a group of people that you trust, then that's obviously the priority as well. And you might say, well, how do I know I can trust them? I think you only really know once you've begun to know them. So it's about building those relationships and moving forward with that. But for me, I would say it's building a sense of self that is built on that foundation, on that rock of trust, and that's interconnected. I think if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's taught us that we're not meant to live alone. We're not meant to be individuals. And when people move into that selfish mode, and we're seeing it even again now with the possibility of a second wave, people all of a sudden buying toilet rolls again and hoarding. But actually, who are the people that are making the toilet rolls? Fortunately, one of my businesses I support, they're a food manufacturer. They've been working busy to produce food, and actually they're kind of at Christmas levels that they're on this massive production. But actually, for them, it's about We are part of a community.
Sure.
We're part of a supply. In business terms, they're part of a supply chain, and that supply chain is there. But actually, we all rely mutually, and there's a mutual cooperation. There's a mutual codependency,
Yeah.
and I think that's one thing that I've really taken away from the pandemic. And as a result of that, it's about supporting ourselves and encouraging ourselves and being interconnected with other people as well.
Yeah. That's really helpful. And the other thing that, as you're saying that again, the thing that occurs to me is the importance of modeling the behavior that you want to receive from other people as well. If you want to, we know that one of the best ways to build up your trust of other people is to be trustworthy and to offer that trust to other people.
Absolutely.
Alastair, we've run out of time, but that's been fascinating. Like all of these interviews, I've got so many things to think about, to go away and kind of carry on thinking about. But for now, that's our time. Thank you very much, Alastair.
Great. Thanks very much, Andy.